The recording device hit the marble floor with a metallic clang that echoed through the stunned silence of the cathedral. Sarah's voice, crystal clear and devastating, continued to pour from the speakers. David promised me he'd leave her after the baby was born. He said I was the love of his life, not some consolation prize he settled for. The bride's bouquet trembled in her manicured hands as 300 wedding guests turned to stare at the groom, whose face had drained of all color. What started as humiliation became the sweetest revenge anyone had ever witnessed. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back 6 months, to a small music studio in downtown Nashville, where Sarah Chen was teaching her last piano lesson of the day. At 34, Sarah carried herself with the quiet grace of someone who had learned to find strength in solitude. Her long black hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her fingers bore the calluses of someone who had spent decades coaxing melodies from reluctant keys. She had built her life around music after her divorce 3 years ago, when David Mitchell walked out on their 10-year marriage, claiming he needed space to find himself. The irony wasn't lost on her that finding himself apparently meant finding his way into the arms of Victoria Ashworth, daughter of the most prominent real estate developer in Tennessee. Victoria was everything Sarah wasn't: blonde, petite, and born into the kind of wealth that opened doors before you even knew they were closed. While Sarah worked 60-hour weeks between teaching piano and performing at local venues to keep her modest apartment, the biggest decision was which charity gala dress made her look more philanthropic. Sarah's studio occupied the 3rd floor of an old brick building that creaked with every footstep. The walls were lined with photographs of her former students, their faces beaming as they held certificates from various competitions. Music had always been Sarah's sanctuary, the place where her childhood stutter disappeared and her voice found its power. Growing up as the daughter of Chinese immigrants who worked double shifts at their small restaurant, Sarah learned early that excellence was the only currency that mattered. Her mother would say, "Hands that create beauty never go hungry," while teaching her Chopin nocturnes on their second-hand upright piano. It was during one of those childhood practice sessions that 9-year-old Sarah first met David Mitchell. His family had moved next door, and his mother, Patricia, brought him over with fresh-baked cookies and a request. "Sarah plays so beautifully," Patricia told Sarah's parents. "Would it be possible for David to listen sometimes? He's been having trouble sleeping since his father deployed overseas." That first afternoon, 8-year-old David sat cross-legged on their living room floor, eyes closed as Sarah played Debussy's Clair de Lune. When she finished, he opened his eyes and whispered, "It sounds like what peace feels like." For the next 9 years, music became the thread that wove their lives together. David would climb through Sarah's bedroom window on nights when his mother's drinking made home unbearable, and she would play softly until his breathing evened out. When his father returned from deployment with invisible wounds that made him rage at shadows, Sarah's piano became David's lifeline. "Promise me you'll never stop playing," he told her the night before they left for different colleges. "Promise me that when I'm lost, your music will help me find my way home." That promise haunted Sarah now as she locked up her studio and walked to her car, a 12-year-old Honda Civic that had seen better decades. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Marcus Thompson. "Emergency meeting at Rosie's Diner. Now. Trust me, you need to hear this." Marcus had been her rock since the divorce, a fellow musician who played bass in various Nashville bars and had an uncanny ability to appear whenever Sarah's world started crumbling. Rosie's Diner occupied a narrow slice of real estate between a pawn shop and a tattoo parlor, the kind of place where the coffee was strong, the pie was homemade, and nobody asked too many questions. Sarah found Marcus in their usual booth, his dark skin gleaming with sweat despite the air conditioning, his usually calm demeanor replaced by barely contained agitation. "Sit down," Marcus said, sliding a manila envelope across the red vinyl table, "and prepare yourself for a kick in the teeth." Inside were elegant cream-colored cards with raised gold lettering. "Mr. and Mrs. Robert Ashworth request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter Victoria Rose to David Jonathan Mitchell." Sarah stared at the invitation, her stomach dropping like a stone. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because, honey, it gets worse." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her a screenshot of an Instagram post from Victoria's account. The image showed Victoria in a flowing white dress, arms wrapped around David in what looked like an engagement photo shoot. The caption read, "So excited to announce that my amazing fiancé David has arranged the most incredible surprise for our wedding. His talented ex-wife Sarah will be performing during our ceremony. Because David says my wedding day deserves only the most beautiful music. and apparently she's the only one who can deliver it. Can't wait to hear what she's prepared for us. The blood drained from Sarah's face. He didn't. Oh, but he did. Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to an angry whisper. I talked to Jenny at Morrison Music Agency. David contacted them 2 weeks ago, specifically requesting you for a wedding gig. He told them it was a surprise for the bride, that you two were old friends and you'd be thrilled to perform. Sarah's hands shook as she set the phone down. He can't just... I never agreed to this. That's not even the worst part, Marcus continued. The wedding is at First Presbyterian Cathedral. 300 guests. It's being covered by Nashville Scene magazine as the social event of the season. And David specifically requested that you perform The Way You Look Tonight during the ceremony. Your song, Sarah, the one you sang at your own wedding to him. The memory hit Sarah like a physical blow. Standing in the small chapel where she and David had exchanged vows, wearing her grandmother's simple white dress, singing the song that had played during their first dance. David's eyes had been filled with tears as she sang, and he had whispered, I love you, in the pause between verses. Now he wanted her to sing those same words while he married another woman. I won't do it, Sarah said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew it wasn't that simple. Morrison Music Agency handled most of the high-end wedding bookings in Nashville. Refusing this gig, especially after David had already announced her participation publicly, would effectively blacklist her from the wedding circuit that provided 30% of her income. Marcus reached across the table and squeezed her hand. There's something else. I did some digging into Mr. Perfect's new life. Turns out David's been playing the grieving divorcee card pretty hard with Victoria's family, telling them how his first marriage fell apart because you were too career-focused to give him children, how you prioritized your music over your relationship. Sarah's jaw tightened. The truth was exactly the opposite. She had been ready to start a family, had even stopped taking birth control pills without telling David, because she thought surprising him with a pregnancy would rekindle the spark in their marriage. Instead, she had discovered his affair with Victoria through a text message he forgot to delete. Can't wait to start our real life together, once I get this divorce finalized. But here's the interesting part, Marcus continued, pulling up another photo on his phone. I have a friend who works at Mercy General Hospital. She says David's been a regular visitor in the fertility clinic there. Apparently, Mr. I Want a House Full of Kids has been dealing with some issues in that department. Issues that predate his relationship with Victoria by about 2 years. The implication hit Sarah immediately. During the last year of their marriage, when David had grown distant and started working late constantly, when their physical relationship had dwindled to nothing, he had blamed her. You're not the woman I married, he had said during one of their final arguments. You're cold, disconnected. How can I be intimate with someone who cares more about her piano than her husband? Now she understood. David's withdrawal hadn't been about her at all. He had been dealing with a medical condition that affected his fertility, and, likely, other aspects of their relationship. Instead of confiding in his wife, instead of working through the problem together, he had found someone new to start over with. Someone who didn't know about his struggles. Someone who represented a fresh beginning, free from the shame and disappointment he associated with his condition. That son of a bitch, Sarah whispered, the words carrying a weight of 3 years' worth of self-doubt and misplaced guilt. It gets better, Marcus said with a grim smile. Victoria's been posting all over social media about their attempts to get pregnant. Lots of fertility clinic visits, lots of sending prayers up for God's timing posts. Girl has no idea she signed up for a much harder journey than she bargained for. Sarah stared out the window at the Nashville skyline, her mind racing. David had destroyed their marriage by lying and cheating, then convinced his new wife's family that Sarah was the problem. He had manipulated her professional reputation to force her into the humiliating position of singing at his wedding. And now he was building his new life on the same foundation of deception and misdirection that had destroyed their relationship. What would you do? Sarah asked Marcus, her voice barely audible over the diner's classic rock soundtrack. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, stirring sugar into his coffee with deliberate precision. I'd make sure Victoria knew exactly who she was marrying before she signed those papers, he said finally. And I'd make sure David learned that some people can't be pushed around forever. That night, Sarah sat at her grandmother's piano in her small apartment, running her fingers over the keys without pressing them down. The instrument was the only thing of real value she had kept after the divorce, a 1923 Steinway upright that her grandmother had brought from Shanghai in 1962. The wood was worn smooth in places from decades of practice sessions, and several of the ivory keys had small chips that created unique textures under Sarah's fingertips. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Sarah, it's Victoria. I hope you don't mind David giving me your number. I wanted to reach out personally to thank you for agreeing to sing at our wedding. David speaks so highly of your talent, and I know having you there will make our day perfect. I've been following your career online, and I'm such a fan. Would you be available for a quick coffee this week to discuss the details? XOXO, Victoria." Sarah stared at the message, struck by something unexpected. Victoria sounded genuinely kind. There was no hint of smugness or malice in the text. No suggestion that she saw Sarah as anything other than a talented musician who was graciously contributing to their special day. Either Victoria was a masterful manipulator, or she was completely unaware of the cruelty inherent in this arrangement. Sarah's fingers found the keys, and without conscious thought, she began playing the opening bars of "The Way You Look Tonight." The melody that had once symbolized love and promise now felt like a funeral dirge. But as she played, another tune began weaving itself through the familiar chords, something darker and more complex. Her left hand maintained the wedding song structure, while her right hand explored a counter melody that spoke of secrets and revelations. She played until her neighbors started pounding on the walls, then sat in the darkness, staring at Victoria's text message. Tomorrow, she would have to decide. Would she show up to David's wedding as the compliant ex-wife, singing his new bride down the aisle with grace and dignity? Or would she find a way to ensure that Victoria Ashworth walked into her marriage with her eyes wide open? The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Sarah's music studio. She was setting up for her first lesson of the day when a soft knock interrupted her preparation. Standing in the doorway was an elderly black woman with silver hair pulled into an elegant chignon and wearing a navy blue dress that spoke of both quality and practicality. "Ms. Chen, I'm Dorothy Washington. I hope you have a moment to speak with me about a matter of mutual interest." Sarah recognized the name immediately. Dorothy Washington was a legend in Nashville's music scene, a former backup singer who had worked with everyone from Aretha Franklin to Dolly Parton before transitioning into artist management and eventually becoming one of the most respected vocal coaches in the city. Her client list was a who's who of country and soul music, and her reputation for both exceptional skill and unwavering integrity was unmatched. Mrs. Washington, of course. "Please, come in. Can I offer you some coffee?" Dorothy settled into the small chair Sarah kept for parents during lessons, her movements graceful despite her 70-something years. "Coffee would be lovely, dear. And please, call me Dorothy." As Sarah busied herself with the small coffee maker in the corner, Dorothy continued, "I understand you're facing a rather unusual professional situation." Sarah froze, coffee filter halfway to the machine. "I'm sorry? Word travels fast in our business, honey." When David Mitchell started spreading the story about how his dear friend Sarah Chen was going to sing at his wedding, it reached my ears pretty quickly, along with some other interesting information about Mr. Mitchell's character. Dorothy accepted the steaming mug Sarah offered her and took a careful sip. "You see, about 6 months ago, Victoria Ashworth approached me about vocal coaching. Sweet girl, but not particularly talented. She wanted to surprise her fiancé by singing at their wedding reception. During our sessions, she told me quite a lot about David's first marriage." Sarah sat down across from Dorothy, her hands wrapped around her own coffee mug for warmth. "What did she tell you?" "According to Victoria, David painted quite the picture of his ex-wife. Said you were cold, career-obsessed, unwilling to compromise or start a family. He told her that you had become bitter and vindictive after the divorce, that you blamed him for your own shortcomings as a wife." Dorothy's eyes flashed with indignation. "I've been in this business for 50 years, Sarah. I know talent when I see it, and I know character when I see it. The woman David described bears no resemblance to the person sitting in front of me." Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her throat, the precursor to tears she refused to shed. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I also know Victoria's family. Her father, Robert Ashworth, is a good man who's worked hard for everything he has. He built his business on handshake deals and kept his word even when it cost him money. Victoria is his only daughter, and he wants her to be happy. But more than that, he wants her to be safe." Dorothy leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspirative whisper. "Robert asked me to do some discreet inquiries about David's background before the wedding. What I found, well, let's just say your ex-husband has been busy reinventing himself." She reached into her purse and pulled out a thin manila folder. David told Victoria's family that he was a successful financial consultant who left his previous firm to start his own practice. The truth is, he was fired from Morrison Financial for mismanaging client accounts. 3 separate families lost significant portions of their retirement savings because David made unauthorized high-risk investments. Sarah's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as her hands began to shake. He never told me about any of this. It gets worse, Dorothy continued, opening the folder to reveal several documents. He's currently being sued by 2 of those families. The cases are scheduled to go to trial next month, right around the time he and Victoria get back from their honeymoon. Victoria has no idea about any of this. The first document was a copy of a lawsuit filing, Henderson versus Mitchell Financial Services. Sarah scanned the legal language, her musician's brain struggling to parse the financial terminology. The basic facts were clear enough. David had convinced an elderly couple to invest their life savings in cryptocurrency and high-risk tech stocks without their knowledge or consent. When the investments failed, they lost nearly everything. There's more, Dorothy said, producing a second document. David's been financing his lifestyle for the past year through credit card advances and personal loans. He's over $200,000 in debt, and most of it is secured against assets he doesn't actually own. Sarah looked up from the papers, confusion evident on her face. What do you mean? He listed Victoria's engagement ring as collateral on one of the loans, the ring her grandmother left her worth about $50,000. He also listed the house they're supposed to move into after the wedding, a house that's still in Robert Ashworth's name. The implications were staggering. David wasn't just lying about his past, he was actively defrauding his future wife's family. If these loans came due and he couldn't pay, Victoria could lose family heirlooms and property that had been in the Ashworth family for generations. Why are you showing me this? Sarah asked. Shouldn't Robert know about all this? Dorothy's smile was sad, but determined. Robert hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago. He knows everything I just showed you and more. But Victoria is 26 years old and madly in love. When Robert tried to talk to her about postponing the wedding, she accused him of being controlling and threatened to elope. She said David had warned her that her family would try to break them up because they thought she could do better. So she thinks her father's concerns are just snobbery? Exactly. And David has been very clever about it. Every time Robert tries to raise a concern, David frames it as class prejudice or family interference. He's isolated Victoria from the people who love her most and could protect her. Sarah set down her coffee cup, her mind racing. But if Robert knows all this, why isn't he doing something more direct? Surely he could find a way to stop the wedding. Dorothy's expression grew grim. Because David has been very careful to make sure all his crimes are civil matters, not criminal ones. Mismanaging client funds, taking out fraudulent loans. These are things that will destroy him financially and professionally, but they won't put him in jail. And Victoria is an adult. If her father tries to force her hand, he risks losing his daughter forever. So what can be done? The truth needs to come out in a way that doesn't make Robert look like the villain. Victoria needs to discover David's deceptions herself, in a context where she can't dismiss them as family interference. Dorothy leaned back in her chair, studying Sarah's face carefully. Which brings me to why I'm really here. Sarah waited, sensing that whatever came next would change everything. I want to offer you a different kind of performance opportunity, Dorothy said. Victoria's been practicing a song to surprise David at the reception. She asked me to arrange for backup musicians, and I think you'd be perfect for the job. I don't understand. Victoria plans to sing Stand By Me as her gift to David during their first dance. She wants to show him how committed she is to supporting him through whatever challenges they might face. Dorothy's smile held no warmth. I think it would be beautiful if during that performance, some information came to light that helped Victoria understand exactly what she's committing to. The plan Dorothy outlined was elegant in its simplicity. Victoria had asked for a full backup band for her surprise performance, including piano, bass, and drums. Dorothy had already arranged for Marcus to play bass and Tommy Chen, no relation to Sarah despite the name, to play drums. Sarah would be on piano, positioned where she could see both the wedding party and the audience. But here's the crucial part, Dorothy continued. Robert has been documenting everything about David's financial crimes. Bank statements, loan applications, correspondence with the families who are suing him. He's prepared a complete dossier that proves David's deceptions beyond any doubt. And you want me to somehow deliver this information during the wedding? Not exactly. Dorothy pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a small device that looked like a flash drive. This contains audio recordings of David's conversations with his lawyer about the pending lawsuits. Conversations where he admits to the unauthorized investments and discusses strategies for hiding his assets from the families he defrauded. Sarah stared at the device. How did Robert get these? David's lawyer is an old friend of Robert's. When he realized what David was doing, he felt obligated to warn Robert about what his daughter was walking into. He's been recording their conversations to protect himself legally. This seems complicated and potentially illegal. Dorothy's expression grew serious. Everything I'm showing you was obtained legally. David's lawyer is cooperating with the families who are suing him, and these recordings will be entered as evidence in the civil cases next month. The only question is whether Victoria learns about her fiancé's character before or after she marries him. Sarah picked up the small device, turning it over in her hands. What exactly are you asking me to do? Victoria's surprise performance is scheduled for right after the ceremony, during cocktail hour before dinner. The acoustics in the cathedral's fellowship hall are excellent. Whatever plays through the sound system will be heard clearly by everyone present. If, for example, the wrong audio file were to start playing instead of the backing track for Stand By Me, the entire wedding party would hear David admitting to fraud and discussing how to hide assets from his victims. Exactly. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. What happens to Victoria when she hears this? Dorothy's expression softened. Victoria is stronger than her father gives her credit for. She's been sheltered, yes, but she's not weak. When she learns the truth about David, she'll be devastated, but she'll also be free to make an informed decision about her future. And David? David will face the consequences of his choices. The lawsuits will proceed, his debts will come due, and his reputation will be destroyed. But more importantly, he won't be able to drag Victoria and her family down with him. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the busy street below. A young couple walked by holding hands, laughing at something one of them had said. They looked happy and carefree, blissfully unaware of the complexities that lay ahead in any relationship. Can you guarantee that this won't destroy Victoria? Sarah asked without turning around. No, Dorothy said quietly. I can't. But I can guarantee that marrying David without knowing who he really is will destroy her eventually. Better she face the truth now when she has family support and time to rebuild than discover it years from now when she's financially ruined and emotionally isolated. Sarah turned back to Dorothy, her decision crystallizing. What do you need me to do? For the next 2 weeks, Sarah threw herself into preparation with an intensity that surprised her. She met with Dorothy twice more to go over the technical details of the plan, practiced with Marcus and Tommy until their backing for Stand By Me was flawless, and spent hours listening to the audio files Robert had provided. The recordings were damning. In conversation after conversation, David admitted to making unauthorized investments, discussed strategies for hiding assets from his creditors, and made callous comments about both Victoria and her family. In one particularly chilling exchange, he laughed about Victoria's naivety. She actually thinks I'm this reformed bad boy who's going to settle down and give her babies. If she only knew I can barely keep my business afloat, let alone support a family. But the most devastating recording was a conversation between David and his lawyer about the fertility issues that had contributed to the end of his marriage with Sarah. The thing is, David's voice came clearly through the speakers, I never told Victoria about the fertility problems. She thinks we're going to start trying for kids right away. When nothing happens, I'll just blame her. Worked with Sarah for months before I finally got tired of the charade and found someone new. Sarah had to stop the recording and sit in silence for several minutes after hearing that part. The casual cruelty of it, the way David discussed manipulating both his wives' deepest desires for family and connection, revealed a level of narcissism that was almost pathological. 3 days before the wedding, Sarah received another text from Victoria. Sarah, I'm so excited you'll be part of our special day. David told me you two have remained such good friends, and I think it's beautiful that you want to celebrate our love with us. I've attached the final timeline for Saturday. You're scheduled to play during cocktail hour right after the ceremony. Can't wait to meet you in person. XOXO, Victoria. The timeline Victoria sent revealed just how carefully orchestrated the entire event was. The ceremony would take place at 4 p.m. in the main cathedral, followed immediately by cocktail hour in the fellowship hall. Victoria's surprise performance was scheduled for 5:15 p.m., right after the receiving line finished and before the formal dinner began. The timing was perfect. All 300 guests would be present, the photographer would be capturing candid moments, and the festive atmosphere would make the contrast with the recorded revelations even more dramatic. Sarah called Marcus that evening. "Are you sure about this?" she asked without preamble when he answered. "Are you having second thoughts?" "I'm having all the thoughts. This is going to destroy Victoria's wedding day. It's going to humiliate David in front of everyone he knows. It's going to create chaos that affects 300 innocent people who just wanted to celebrate what they thought was a love story." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, do you remember what you told me the night David asked for the divorce?" She did remember. She had shown up at Marcus's apartment at 2 a.m, still in her pajamas, makeup streaked down her face from crying. "I said I felt like I was losing my mind, that I couldn't understand how someone who claimed to love me could be so cruel. And do you remember what I told you? You said that people who truly love you don't make you question your own reality, that love doesn't require you to diminish yourself to make someone else feel bigger." Exactly. And now David is doing the same thing to Victoria, except this time there are financial crimes and family assets at risk. This isn't about revenge, Sarah. This is about stopping a predator before he can destroy another life. The morning of the wedding dawned gray and drizzly, the kind of overcast Nashville day that made even the most beautiful venues look slightly melancholy. Sarah spent the morning at her studio, running through her repertoire one final time. Her fingers moved automatically through the pieces she would play during cocktail hour. Light classical arrangements, some contemporary ballads, and the backup for Victoria's surprise performance. The recording device Dorothy had given her sat on top of the piano like a small black accusation. Sarah had programmed it to replace the backing track for Stand By Me with the most damning of David's recorded conversations. A 12-minute compilation that included admissions of fraud, discussions of asset hiding, and his callous comments about Victoria's expectations for their marriage. At 2 p.m., Sarah loaded her equipment into her Honda and drove to First Presbyterian Cathedral. The venue was stunning, a Gothic revival structure built in 1851, with soaring spires and intricate stained glass windows that cast rainbow patterns across the stone floors even on this cloudy day. Wedding vendors moved efficiently through the space, transforming the already beautiful architecture into something that belonged in a fairy tale. Victoria's color scheme was ivory and gold with touches of deep burgundy, and the flowers were elegant arrangements of roses, peonies, and eucalyptus that filled the air with their sweet fragrance. White silk ribbons marked the family pews, and hundreds of candles waited to be lit as guests arrived. Despite everything Sarah knew about David, she couldn't help but admire Victoria's taste and the obvious love that had gone into planning every detail. "You must be Sarah." The voice belonged to a petite blonde woman in an ivory silk robe, her hair in elaborate curlers and her face glowing with pre-wedding excitement. Victoria Ashworth was even more beautiful in person than in her social media photos, with large blue eyes and the kind of natural radiance that comes from genuine happiness. Sarah's heart clenched as Victoria rushed over and pulled her into an enthusiastic hug. "I can't believe you're here. David has told me so much about your talent, and I've been watching videos of your performances online. You're incredible." "Thank you," Sarah managed. "You look beautiful, Victoria. Are you excited?" "I'm beyond excited. I keep pinching myself to make sure this isn't all a dream." Victoria's eyes sparkled as she gestured around the cathedral. "David and I have been planning this for months, and everything is perfect. Well, almost everything. I'm terrified about my surprise performance for him, but Dorothy says you and the other musicians will make me sound amazing." The genuine affection in Victoria's voice made Sarah's stomach churn. This wasn't a woman who deserved what was about to happen to her. But then again, she also didn't deserve to marry a man who had already begun planning how to manipulate and deceive her. "Victoria," Sarah said carefully, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. How long have you and David been together?" Victoria's smile grew even brighter. 18 months. I know it seems fast, but when you know, right? David says he knew I was the one from our very first date. He told me that his first marriage taught him what he didn't want in a relationship, and that meeting me showed him what real love could be." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. David had told her almost identical words during their courtship, about how his previous girlfriends had taught him to recognize true love when he found it. "He's been so protective of our relationship," Victoria continued. "He warned me that some people might try to interfere because they don't understand our connection. He said his ex-wife might be bitter about our happiness, but that you've been incredibly gracious about everything." I think it's so mature of you to put the past behind you and help make our day special." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. David had been preparing Victoria for months to dismiss any concerns about their relationship as interference or jealousy. He had framed Sarah's potential objections as bitterness, ensuring that anything negative Victoria might hear would be filtered through the lens of assumed vindictiveness. "Victoria," Sarah said slowly, "what has David told you about his first marriage?" Victoria's expression grew slightly uncomfortable. "I probably shouldn't. David doesn't like to talk about that time in his life. He says it was very painful for both of you." "But he has told you some things?" "Well, he mentioned that you two wanted different things, that you were very career-focused, and he was ready to settle down and start a family. He said the divorce was mutual, but that you've had a hard time moving on." Victoria's voice dropped to a whisper. "He feels terrible about that, actually. He blames himself for not being clear enough about what he wanted from the beginning." Sarah stared at Victoria, marveling at David's ability to rewrite history. In his version of events, he was the victim of an ambitious wife who prioritized career over family, and the benevolent ex-husband who felt guilty about Sarah's inability to move forward with her life. "Did he tell you about his fertility issues?" Sarah asked. Victoria's eyes widened in surprise. "His what?" "Nothing," Sarah said quickly, realizing she had almost revealed information that would expose her own knowledge of David's medical history. I hope you two have talked about your plans for children. That's important." "Oh, we have. David is so excited to start a family. He says he wants 4 kids, maybe 5. He jokes that he's going to make up for lost time." Victoria's laugh was bright and innocent. "I told him we should probably start with one and see how it goes, but he's already picking out names for the whole baseball team he wants." Sarah felt sick. David was setting Victoria up for years of disappointment and self-blame, just as he had done with Sarah. When Victoria didn't get pregnant immediately, David would likely convince her that the problem was hers, that she needed fertility treatments, or that her stress was preventing conception. It might be years before she discovered the truth, and by then, David would have moved on to someone new. "I should probably get back to the bridal suite," Victoria said, glancing at the ornate clock on the cathedral wall. "Pictures start in an hour, and my hairstylist will kill me if I mess up these curls. But Sarah, thank you again for being here. It means so much to both of us." As Victoria hurried away, Sarah was left standing alone in the fellowship hall where, in 3 hours, she would destroy this young woman's happiness in front of 300 guests. She looked down at the recording device in her hand and wondered if there was any scenario where everyone involved didn't end up damaged by the truth. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later with Tommy Chen and the rest of their equipment. The fellowship hall was a more intimate space than the main cathedral, with warm wood paneling and large windows that looked out onto the church's garden. The acoustics were indeed excellent, as Dorothy had promised. Every whisper carried clearly across the room. "You look like you're about to throw up," Marcus observed as they set up their equipment. "I might," Sarah admitted. She's lovely, Marcus. She genuinely cares about David, and she has no idea what kind of person she's marrying. When those recordings play, it's going to destroy her." Tommy looked up from where he was assembling his drum kit. "What's the alternative? Let her marry a guy who's going to steal from her family and manipulate her for years?" "I know you're right," Sarah said. "But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are 2 different things. I keep thinking about how I would have felt if someone had exposed David's lies at our wedding, in front of everyone we cared about." Marcus stopped tuning his bass and looked at her seriously. "How do you think you would have felt?" Sarah considered the question for a long moment. Humiliated, devastated, but also, she paused, searching for the right words. Also grateful, eventually. If someone had saved me from 3 years of marriage to a man who was lying to me from the beginning, if they had prevented me from building my life around someone who was planning to betray me anyway, I would have been grateful. Then you know what we have to do. By 4 p.m., guests had begun arriving for the ceremony. Sarah watched from the fellowship hall windows as elegantly dressed people made their way up the cathedral steps, their faces bright with anticipation for the celebration ahead. She recognized several faces from Nashville's social and business communities. Politicians, musicians, real estate developers, and old Nashville families whose names appeared on hospital wings and university buildings. David's side of the guest list was noticeably smaller than Victoria's, filled primarily with his work colleagues and a few childhood friends. Sarah spotted David's mother, Patricia Mitchell, looking older and frailer than Sarah remembered, being escorted by a young man Sarah didn't recognize. Patricia had always been kind to Sarah during their marriage, and Sarah felt a pang of guilt about what the older woman was about to witness. At 4:15, the ceremony began. Sarah could hear the organ music drifting through the cathedral walls, followed by the murmur of guests rising as Victoria walked down the aisle. Sarah tried not to imagine the scene. Victoria, in her designer gown, radiant with happiness, walking toward a future she believed would be filled with love and security. The ceremony lasted 45 minutes, and at 5 p.m., guests began filing into the fellowship hall for cocktail hour. Sarah took her position at the piano and began playing soft background music. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pressed the keys, the melody floating through the decorated church hall where white roses and baby's breath adorned every surface. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was providing the soundtrack to Mark's perfect day, the same Mark who had left her devastated and broken just 8 months ago. The guests chatted quietly, champagne glasses clinking softly as they waited for the ceremony to begin. Sarah kept her eyes fixed on the sheet music, though she knew every note by heart. She had practiced this playlist for weeks, each song carefully chosen by Mark's new bride, Jessica. Songs that had once meant something to Sarah and Mark, now repurposed for someone else's happiness. "Beautiful playing," whispered Mrs. Henderson, the elderly church organist who had recommended Sarah for this gig. "Though I still think it's strange that your ex-husband requested you specifically." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she managed a polite smile. Strange didn't begin to cover it. When Mark had called 3 weeks ago, his voice had that familiar manipulative edge she remembered so well. "Sarah, sweetheart, I need a favor. Jessica loves your playing, and we really want you to perform at our wedding. It would mean the world to us." She had wanted to hang up immediately, but then he had mentioned the payment, $5,000. With Emma's medical bills piling up and her teaching salary barely covering rent, she couldn't afford to say no. Her 7-year-old daughter needed those treatments, and Sarah would swallow her pride for Emma's sake. The church doors opened, and Mark entered with his groomsmen. He looked exactly the same, tall, confident, with that charming smile that had once made her heart race. Now it just made her stomach churn. He caught her eye and gave her a small wave, as if they were old friends rather than former spouses whose marriage had ended in devastating betrayal. Behind the piano, Sarah's purse sat with a small recording device tucked safely inside. She had discovered its contents purely by accident 2 weeks ago while helping Emma with a school project. The device had belonged to Sarah's late father, a private investigator who had always been suspicious of Mark. What she had found on it changed everything. The wedding march began, and Jessica appeared in the doorway, radiant in white silk and lace. She was everything Sarah wasn't. Blonde where Sarah was brunette, tall where Sarah was petite, wealthy where Sarah struggled to make ends meet. The guests rose, and Sarah played with mechanical precision, her mind elsewhere. As Jessica walked down the aisle, Sarah remembered the night Mark had left. She had been in the hospital with Emma, who was having another asthma attack. Sarah had called Mark repeatedly, but he never answered. She later found out he had been with Jessica that very night, planning their future, while his wife and daughter faced a medical emergency alone. The ceremony proceeded smoothly. Reverend Mitchell spoke about love, commitment, and the sacred bonds of marriage. Sarah played each transition perfectly, her years of training taking over despite the emotional turmoil. She watched as Mark and Jessica exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other through sickness and health, for better or worse. "Do you, Mark Patterson, take Jessica Reynolds to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Mitchell asked. "I do," Mark replied confidently, slipping the ring onto Jessica's finger. Sarah's fingers pressed a little harder on the keys, the music swelling slightly. In her purse, the recording device waited patiently. Her father had always taught her that patience was a virtue, that justice came to those who waited for the right moment. As the couple kissed and the guests applauded, Sarah felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She played the recessional as the newlyweds walked back down the aisle, Mark's arm around Jessica's waist, both of them beaming with happiness. The reception was held in the church's adjoining hall, decorated with the same white roses and twinkling lights. Sarah was supposed to continue playing during dinner, providing ambient music while the guests celebrated. She had been given a small table near the back, close enough to be heard but far enough to remain mostly invisible. As she played, Sarah observed the guests. There was Jessica's father, Robert Reynolds, a prominent businessman who owned half the commercial real estate in town. Jessica's mother, Patricia, draped in expensive jewelry and designer clothes. Mark's family was there too, his parents, his sister Linda, and various relatives who had once treated Sarah like family, but had quickly chosen sides when the marriage ended. "Sarah," Linda approached her table during a break in the music. "I'm so glad you could make it. You look wonderful." Sarah forced a smile. "Thank you, Linda. It's a beautiful wedding. Jessica specifically wanted you to play. She said Mark mentioned how talented you are." Linda's voice carried that slightly patronizing tone Sarah remembered. "It's so mature of you both to remain friends after everything." Friends. Sarah almost laughed. Mark had destroyed their marriage, abandoned their daughter, and left them in financial ruin. But sure, they were friends. The evening continued with speeches and toasts. Robert Reynolds spoke about his daughter's happiness and how Mark had proven himself to be the perfect son-in-law. Mark's father praised the couple's love and commitment. Everyone raised their glasses, celebrating the union while Sarah played softly in the background. Then came Mark's speech. He stood up, handsome in his black tuxedo, commanding the attention of the room with natural ease. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here to celebrate this incredible day with Jessica and me. When I think about love, real love, I think about second chances and finding the person you're truly meant to be with." Sarah's hands stilled on the piano keys for just a moment. Second chances. As if their marriage had been some kind of practice run rather than 7 years of her life. 7 years of love, sacrifice, and commitment. Jessica showed me what it means to be truly loved and supported. She believed in me when I was starting my business, encouraged my dreams, and stood by me through every challenge. The lies flowed so easily from his lips. Jessica hadn't been there during the lean years when Sarah had worked double shifts at the diner to support Mark's failing business ventures. Jessica hadn't held his head while he was sick, hadn't sacrificed her own career dreams to support his ambitions, hadn't given birth to his child only to raise her essentially alone. "To my beautiful wife," Mark raised his glass toward Jessica, "thank you for showing me what real partnership looks like." The guests applauded, and Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. She glanced at her purse, where the recording device waited. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Sometimes, sweetheart, justice isn't about revenge. It's about truth." As the evening progressed, the guests began to request songs. Jessica asked for "At Last" by Etta James, the same song that had been Sarah and Mark's first dance at their own wedding. Sarah played it flawlessly, watching as the newlyweds swayed together on the small dance floor. "Could you play something more upbeat?" called out one of Mark's college friends. "This is a party, not a funeral." The comment drew laughter from the crowd, and Sarah felt the familiar sting of being treated as hired help rather than a person. She launched into a jazzy rendition of "Fly Me to the Moon," her fingers dancing across the keys with practiced ease. During another break, Jessica approached the piano, radiant in her wedding dress. "Sarah, thank you so much for being here tonight. Your music is absolutely beautiful." Jessica's voice was sincere, and for a moment, Sarah almost felt sorry for her. "Mark told me you two have remained close friends. It speaks so well of both of you. Close friends." Sarah wondered what other stories Mark had told his new wife about their past. Had he mentioned the nights Sarah had sat up with Emma during her worst asthma attacks while he slept peacefully? Had he told Jessica about the time Sarah had sold her grandmother's ring to keep their apartment when his business was failing? "It's a lovely wedding," Sarah replied diplomatically. "You look beautiful. I hope we can be friends too," Jessica continued. "Mark speaks of you so fondly, and any friend of his is a friend of mine." Sarah nodded, her smile feeling like plastic on her face. In her purse, the recording device seemed to pulse with waiting energy. As the night wore on, more guests made requests. Some were songs Sarah knew well, others required her to improvise. She played "The Way You Look Tonight" for Mark's grandparents' anniversary dance, "Wonderful Tonight" for Jessica's parents, and even took a request for "Piano Man," which had the entire room singing along. The alcohol was flowing freely now, and the guests were becoming more animated. Sarah noticed Mark's college roommate David was particularly drunk and becoming increasingly loud about Mark's bachelor party exploits. "Remember that crazy weekend in Vegas?" David shouted across the room to Mark. "What happens in Vegas, right, buddy?" Mark's face tightened slightly, and he quickly redirected the conversation, but Sarah caught the exchange. She also noticed how Jessica's smile faltered for just a moment before returning to its brilliant radiance. As midnight approached, the party began to wind down. Sarah packed up her sheet music and prepared to leave, but Mark intercepted her near the exit. Sarah, wait up. His voice carried that familiar charm, but she could see the calculation behind his eyes. Thank you for tonight. You were incredible as always. Just doing my job, Mark. Come on, don't be like that. We're good, right? For Emma's sake, we should try to maintain a positive relationship. The mention of their daughter made Sarah's blood boil. Mark had seen Emma exactly 3 times since the divorce, each visit lasting less than 2 hours. He had missed her last 2 birthdays and hadn't contributed a penny to her medical expenses despite the court order. Emma's fine. Thanks for asking, Sarah said coolly. I know you're still angry, but Jessica and we want to be part of Emma's life. Maybe she could come visit us sometime, get to know her new stepmom? Sarah stared at him, amazed by his audacity. He wanted to play happy family with the daughter he had abandoned while simultaneously refusing to pay child support. I should go, she said, moving toward the door. The check, Mark called after her, pulling an envelope from his jacket. $5,000 as promised, plus a little extra for your professionalism tonight. Sarah took the envelope, knowing she needed the money despite how much it galled her to accept it. As her fingers closed around the paper, she felt the small recording device in her purse one more time. Good night, Mark. Congratulations on your marriage. She walked to her car, her heels clicking on the church parking lot pavement. Behind her, the reception continued, laughter and music spilling out into the cool night air. Sarah sat in her car for a moment, staring at the warm light streaming from the church windows. Tomorrow, she thought, tomorrow everything would change. The next morning, Sarah woke to Emma's gentle shaking. Mommy, you're going to be late for church, her daughter whispered. Sarah sat up, momentarily disoriented. Church, of course. It was Sunday, and they never missed Sunday service at First Baptist, the same church where Mark and Jessica had been married just 12 hours earlier. I'm up, sweetheart. Go get ready. As Emma scampered off to her room, Sarah reached for her phone. 3 missed calls from Linda, Mark's sister. 2 text messages from Jessica thanking her again for the beautiful music, and 1 voicemail from a number she didn't recognize. She played the voicemail while making coffee. Ms. Patterson, this is Detective Rodriguez with the City Police Department. I understand you were performing at the Reynolds-Patterson wedding last night. I need to speak with you regarding an ongoing investigation. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. Sarah's blood went cold. An investigation? She quickly dialed the detective's number. Detective Rodriguez, this is Sarah Patterson returning your call. Mrs. Patterson, thank you for calling back so quickly. I'm investigating some irregularities regarding Mark Patterson's business dealings, and I understand you might have information that could be relevant. Sarah's mind raced. What kind of information? I'd rather discuss this in person. Could you come to the station this morning? It won't take long. After hanging up, Sarah sat in her kitchen, staring at her purse where the recording device waited. She had planned to reveal its contents herself, but perhaps fate had other plans. At the police station, Detective Rodriguez was a middle-aged Hispanic woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She led Sarah to a small interview room and offered her coffee. Mrs. Patterson, we've been investigating Mark Patterson's company, Patterson Development, for several months now. We have evidence suggesting he's been using investor money for personal expenses and may have defrauded several elderly clients out of their retirement savings. Sarah felt the pieces clicking together. The Reynolds investment. Among others, Robert Reynolds invested $2 million in Patterson Development 6 months ago, right around the time Mr. Patterson began dating his daughter. We believe Mr. Patterson may have deliberately targeted Jessica Reynolds to gain access to her father's money. Sarah's stomach turned. Jessica was as much a victim as anyone else, a pawn in Mark's larger scheme. What information do you need from me? Anything you might know about his business practices, his relationships with investors, any conversations you might have overheard. Detective Rodriguez leaned forward. I know this is difficult, given your personal history, but several families have lost their life savings. We need to stop him before he disappears with more money. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out the small recording device. My father was a private investigator. Before he died, he was looking into Mark's business dealings. I found this device in his things 2 weeks ago. Detective Rodriguez's eyes widened. What's on it? Conversations between Mark and various business associates. Discussions about moving money offshore, falsifying documents, and... Sarah paused, her voice catching. Plans to divorce me after he secured the Reynolds investment, with details about how he was manipulating Jessica to get close to her father's money. The detective carefully took the device. Mrs. Patterson, This could be exactly what we need to build our case. You may have just saved dozens of families from financial ruin. Later that afternoon, Sarah was at home helping Emma with homework when her phone rang. Jessica's name appeared on the screen. "Sarah, hi. I hope I'm not bothering you." Jessica's voice sounded strained, different from the night before. "Not at all. How are you enjoying married life?" There was a long pause. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did he ever mention my father's business or his investments during your marriage?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "Why do you ask?" "Some police officers came to see my father this morning. They had questions about Mark's company and some investments. They mentioned your name. Jessica, I think you should talk to your father about this. And maybe you should ask Mark some direct questions about his business." Another long pause. "He's not here. He left early this morning. Said he had some urgent business to handle." "Sarah, I'm scared. Did I marry someone I don't really know?" Sarah felt a wave of sympathy for the younger woman. "Jessica, all I can tell you is to trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is." That evening, the news broke. "Local developer arrested for investment fraud," read the headline on Channel 7's evening broadcast. Sarah watched as footage showed Mark being led away in handcuffs from his office building, his face hidden behind his hands. The reporter detailed the charges: wire fraud, money laundering, elder abuse, and embezzlement. The total amount stolen was estimated at over $8 million, affecting more than 30 families. Sarah's phone rang constantly throughout the evening. Reporters wanted comments, friends and family called with questions, and Emma asked why Daddy was on TV wearing handcuffs. "Sometimes people make very bad choices," Sarah explained to her daughter, "and when they hurt other people, they have to face consequences." "Is Daddy going to jail?" Sarah pulled Emma close. "I don't know, sweetheart, but whatever happens, we're going to be okay. We have each other, and that's what matters most." 2 days later, Jessica called again. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. I had no idea about any of this. My father lost $2 million, and I feel so stupid and used." "Jessica, you're not stupid. Mark is very good at manipulation. He fooled me for 7 years. The police told me about the recording your father made. Thank you for coming forward. I know it couldn't have been easy." Sarah had to admit she felt sorry for Jessica. The young woman had been as much a victim of Mark's schemes as anyone else. "What will you do now?" "Annulment proceedings start Monday, and I'm testifying for the prosecution. I found some documents in Mark's things that might help their case." The trial took place 6 months later. Sarah testified about the recording and about Mark's behavior during their marriage, his manipulation, his lies, his abandonment of their daughter. Jessica testified about how Mark had courted her specifically to gain access to her father's money, producing love letters where he had asked detailed questions about her family's finances. The most damaging testimony came from Margaret Collins, an 82-year-old widow who had invested her entire retirement savings with Mark based on his promises of guaranteed returns. She had lost everything and was now living with her daughter, unable to afford her medications. "He seemed so charming, so trustworthy," Mrs. Collins testified, her voice shaking. "He talked about his own daughter, how he wanted to secure her future. I thought I was helping a good father provide for his child." Mark's defense attorney tried to paint him as a struggling businessman who had made poor decisions rather than a deliberate criminal, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. At sentencing, Mark finally showed some emotion. He turned to address the courtroom, his eyes finding Sarah among the spectators. "I know I've hurt a lot of people, and I'm sorry. Sarah, Emma, I'm especially sorry to you both. I let my ambition and greed destroy everything good in my life." The judge sentenced Mark to 15 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay full restitution to his victims. It would take years for everyone to recover their losses, but at least there was hope for justice. After the sentencing, Detective Rodriguez approached Sarah outside the courthouse. "Mrs. Patterson, I want you to know that your father's recording was the key to this entire case. Without it, Mark might have gotten away with everything and hurt even more people." Sarah thought about her father, how he had always taught her that the truth had a way of surfacing eventually. He would have been proud to know his final investigation had helped bring justice to so many victims. 6 months after the trial, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Jessica knocked on her apartment door on a Saturday morning, looking nervous but determined. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I have something for you." She handed Sarah an envelope containing a check for $50,000. "Jessica, I can't accept this. My father insisted. He said if it weren't for you and your father's investigation, he would have lost even more money. This is just a small way of saying thank you." Sarah stared at the check, thinking of Emma's medical bills, the stack of unpaid invoices on her kitchen table, the scholarship fund she had dreamed of starting in her father's memory. "There's something else," Jessica continued. "I've been thinking about what you said, about Emma needing stability and support. I'd like to contribute to a college fund for her, if that's okay with you. What Mark did to both of you was unforgivable, and I want to help make it right somehow." That afternoon, Sarah sat with Emma in their small living room, helping her daughter with a school project about family history. "Mommy, why did Daddy do those bad things?" Emma asked, her 7-year-old mind struggling to understand the complexities of adult betrayal. "Sometimes people make choices that hurt others, even people they're supposed to love. But that doesn't mean love isn't real or that good people don't exist. Like Jessica? She's not bad even though she married Daddy." Sarah smiled at her daughter's innocent wisdom. "No, sweetheart. Jessica isn't bad. She got tricked too, just like a lot of other people." "Will Daddy ever come home?" Sarah considered her words carefully. "Daddy will be away for a very long time, but we're going to be okay. We have each other, we have friends who care about us, and we have everything we need to be happy." That evening, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat at her kitchen table paying bills with Jessica's check. For the first time in years, she wasn't worried about making rent or affording Emma's medications. Her father's final gift had brought justice not just to Mark's victims, but to her and Emma as well. She thought about the piano recital Emma had coming up next month, the summer camp she could now afford to send her daughter to, the college fund that would ensure Emma's future was secure. Mark had taken so much from them, but in the end, his own greed had been his downfall. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her friend Carol, a fellow single mother she had met at Emma's school. "Coffee tomorrow? I have news about that teaching position at the music school." Sarah smiled as she typed back her response. "Absolutely. I have news too." The next morning brought sunshine and the promise of new beginnings. As Sarah walked Emma to school, her daughter chattered excitedly about her upcoming piano recital. "Mrs. Johnson says I'm her best student this year. Will you play with me at the recital, Mommy?" "Of course, sweetheart. We'll play together." As they walked, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this point. A year ago, she had been broken, struggling, and desperate. She had stood in that church playing piano for her ex-husband's wedding, feeling humiliated and powerless. But sometimes, Sarah realized, justice isn't about getting revenge. Sometimes it's about truth finding its way to the surface, about good people standing up for what's right, and about finding the strength to rebuild your life even after betrayal. Emma skipped ahead, her backpack bouncing with each step, her laughter carrying on the morning breeze. She was resilient, this little girl who had been through so much. She would grow up knowing that her mother had fought for justice, not just for their family, but for everyone Mark had hurt. At the school gate, Emma turned and hugged Sarah tightly. "I love you, Mommy. I love you too, baby. Have a great day." Sarah watched her daughter run toward the school building, her heart full of hope and determination. They had survived Mark's betrayal. They had found justice, and now they were building something new and beautiful from the ashes of their old life. The recording device that had started it all now sat in an evidence locker somewhere, having served its purpose. But its legacy lived on in the families who had recovered their stolen savings, in the justice that had finally been served, and in the new life that Sarah and Emma were building together. Sometimes karma takes time, but it never misses. And sometimes, the sweetest justice comes not from revenge, but from simply telling the truth and letting it shine light into the darkness. As Sarah walked home, planning the day ahead, she thought about her father's favorite saying, "The truth will set you free, but first it might make you angry." She had been angry, devastated, and broken, but now she was free, and so was everyone else Mark had tried to victimize. Justice, Sarah realized, wasn't just about punishment. It was about healing, rebuilding, and making sure that good people could sleep peacefully, knowing that truth and righteousness still mattered in the world. And that's how justice was served. Not with violence or cruelty, but with patience, courage, and an unwavering commitment to doing what's right. Subscribe for more incredible stories of justice and redemption, because sometimes the most powerful victories come to those who refuse to give up hope. Now 2 buttons will appear. One to subscribe if you haven't already, and the other to watch other interesting stories. Choose one. Thank you for watching this far. See you soon.